A man walked into an airport in Bulgaria, terrified. He said people were following him. No one else could see them. Minutes later, he ran, and he's never been seen again.
ID Tech is more than just the original and most trusted tech camp for kids ages 7 to 17. ID Tech is where kids find their people. The engineering and creating people. The fire-breathing, shell-spinning BattleBots people. The just as happy building games as they are playing them people. ID Tech offers over 50 epic courses, like Camp Crunch Labs IRL, BattleBots with Take-Home Bots, and more at 75 college campuses across the country. Visit idtech.com and use code IDTech to save $150 on a week that's guaranteed to be the highlight of your kid's summer.
Here's a shift worth noting. Better healthcare is care that meets patients where they are. United Health Group is bringing it directly to living rooms. This is a win for patients managing chronic conditions. And here's the interesting thing. By closing those care gaps, administering in-home exams, and identifying risks earlier, more diseases can be prevented and patient outcomes can improve. In 2025 alone, United Health Group patients received over 19 million home visits. Learn more at unitedhealthgroup.com/commitment.
While every other channel is fighting for your customers' attention, podcasts are where they've already given it. No one accidentally listens to a podcast for 45 minutes. They choose to be here. They trust the voice in their ears, and when that voice talks about your brand, it doesn't sound like advertising. It sounds like a recommendation from a friend. Acast gives you that trust at scale. Digital precision, host-read authenticity, and performance data that proves it worked. Don't fight for attention. Buy it with Acast. Learn more by visiting acast.com/advertise.
ID Tech is more than just the original and most trusted tech camp for kids ages 7 to 17. ID Tech is where kids find their people. The engineering and creating people. The fire-breathing, shell-spinning BattleBots people. The just as happy building games as they are playing them people. ID Tech offers over 50 epic courses, like Camp Crunch Labs IRL, BattleBots with Take-Home Bots, and more at 75 college campuses across the country. Visit idtech.com and use code IDTech to save $150 on a week that's guaranteed to be the highlight of your kid's summer.
Now, finding a doctor is a little less challenging. United Health Group is investing in tools that make it easier for patients to navigate healthcare and pay less. These transparency tools help patients find providers, and this is the big thing. Compare costs up front. The big picture? More transparent pricing benefits everyone. And these tools from United Health Group can help patients save hundreds of dollars annually. Learn more at unitedhealthgroup.com/commitment.
Hello, I'm Sarah, and welcome to the Whispering Woods After Dark. I've got a mystery for you today, one of those ones that does your head right in. I'll get straight into it. Are you ready for the story? He's already on his feet before the door even opens. The chair skids back across the tiled floor with a sharp scraping crack, loud enough to make the doctor flinch. But the young man barely seems to hear it. His whole body has gone rigid, eyes locked on the door, as if something on the other side of it is breathing, waiting, listening. I don't want to die here. His voice breaks on the last word, thin and desperate. And there is something in it that doesn't belong in a quiet airport clinic on a summer afternoon. It's not the voice of a man asking for help. It's the voice of someone who already believes help is too late. Please, he says louder now, backing away from the desk. I have to get out. The doctor takes a step forward. instinctively trying to calm him. But it only makes things worse. The man's eyes snap towards him, wild and unfocused, as though he is no longer seeing a doctor at all, but something else entirely. Something that has stepped into the room wearing a familiar face. Then, a knock at the door. The young man recoils as if he's been struck. For a moment, everything freezes, and then he runs. It was the height of summer at Varna International Airport, the kind of heat that clings to the skin and settles into the air, turning even routine movement into something sluggish and uncomfortable. Outside, the runway shimmered under the sun, and inside, the terminal was thick with noise. Families returning home, tourists arriving, voices overlapping in half a dozen languages. But tucked away from all of that, behind a plain door marked medical, the atmosphere was very different. Quiet, still, almost detached from everything happening outside. Dr. Kostov had spent most of the afternoon watching the clock. 2 patients so far, nothing urgent, nothing unusual. A kind of shift that passes slowly enough for your mind to wander. He'd already begun considering whether he had time to step out for a coffee when the receptionist appeared at the door. "There's someone else," she said. "A walk-in." He nodded, expecting something minor, travel anxiety, dehydration, maybe another child with a minor injury. That was the rhythm of this place, predictable and manageable. Sent him in. A moment later, the man stepped through the door. At first glance, there was nothing especially remarkable about him. Late 20s, broad build, dressed like any other tourist who had spent too many nights drinking and not enough time sleeping. As he moved further into the room, the details began to settle into place. His skin was pale. Too pale for someone who had just spent a week on the Bulgarian coast. There were dark circles under his eyes, heavy enough to suggest more than just a late night. And then there was the bruise. It stretched across the left side of his jaw in deep, uneven shades of purple and red. The kind that doesn't come from a simple fall or accident, but from something more deliberate. "Sit," the doctor said gently. The man obeyed, but not comfortably. He shifted in the chair, restless, his gaze moving constantly, walls, door, window, back again, never settling for more than a second or two. "My name is Lars," he said. His voice was controlled, but there was tension beneath it. Something coiled and tight, like a wire pulled too far. He explained that he'd been in a fight. 2 nights earlier, a bar. A disagreement that had escalated further than it should have. He said it almost casually, as though trying to reduce it to something ordinary, something that didn't require further attention. But the injury told a different story. When the doctor examined his ear, it didn't take long to confirm it. A ruptured eardrum. Painful, but not uncommon under the circumstances. The kind of injury that needed time more than anything else. "You shouldn't fly," the doctor said. It was a simple statement, but Lars reacted as though something far more serious had just been said. "That's not possible," he replied quickly. There was no hesitation in it, no consideration, just immediate rejection. "I have to leave today." The doctor explained the risks again, more carefully this time, outlining the potential damage, the complications, the simple fact that waiting even a short time would be the safer option. But Lars wasn't really listening. His leg was bouncing now, a steady, agitated rhythm, and his eyes had returned to scanning the room. "Are you taking anything?" the doctor asked. "Medication?" "Yes," Lars said. "Antibiotics." He hesitated, and then, almost as an afterthought, "I think they might have poisoned me." The room seemed to shift slightly at that, not physically, not visibly, in the way certain words change the atmosphere, pulling everything into a different shape. The doctor didn't respond immediately. He had heard variations of this before, though rarely so abruptly, and never quite like this. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. Lars leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The doctor who gave them to me. I don't think he was helping me." There was a flicker of something in his expression then. Fear, certainly, but layered with something else. Suspicion, certainty. "They're trying to stop me leaving." Before the doctor could respond, there was a knock at the door, and everything changed. Before the airport, before the clinic, there was a week that felt ordinary. Warm evenings, loud bars, the kind of laughter that carries across open terraces and down towards the shoreline, where the sea looks almost black once the sun has fully gone. Golden Sands in July is built for that kind of thing. Groups of friends moving from place to place, nights blurring together until time itself starts to lose its edges. For Lars, it was something new. He had never travelled like this before, never really left Germany, never stepped into that particular version of freedom, where everything feels temporary and therefore slightly unreal. As though whatever happens there doesn't quite follow you home. By all accounts, he settled in quickly. Days were easy, swimming, sun, long stretches of nothing in particular. Evenings were louder, looser, messy, filled with the easy confidence that comes with alcohol and familiarity. There was no suggestion, at least at first, that anything was wrong. Friends would later describe him as relaxed, happy, engaged in everything around him. There was no sudden shift, no obvious warning, no moment that stood out as the beginning of anything unusual, which is what makes the final night difficult to place. Because nothing about it begins as extraordinary. It starts the way these things often do, with a small decision, a choice to stay out a little longer. By the evening of July the 6th, the group had already begun to wind down. A week of constant movement, late nights and early mornings had taken its toll. And with their flight home scheduled for the next day, most of them were ready to take things easy. Dinner was quieter than usual, slower. Afterwards, they went for one last drink. A familiar place, nothing out of the ordinary. But sometime around 11, the group began to break apart. Most of them wanted to go back, sleep, pack, prepare for the morning. Lars didn't. He stayed behind, alone but not uncomfortable with it. That in itself wasn't unusual. He was social and confident enough to talk to strangers, the kind of person who didn't need the safety of a group to feel at ease. And for a while, it seemed to work. He began talking to another group of tourists, German like him. The conversation started easily enough, with a shared language, shared background, a quick familiarity built on coincidence. But familiarity can turn quickly, especially in the kind of environment where alcohol has already softened the edges of everything. The subject shifted to football. It sounds insignificant. It usually is. But in certain moments, with the right combination of pride and irritation, even something small can take on a different weight. voices raised, not dramatically at first, just enough to shift the tone. A comment, a response, another comment, sharper this time. And then something changed. It's not entirely clear how the fight began, only that it did. One moment it was a conversation, the next it had moved outside. Into an alley behind the bar, where the light doesn't quite reach properly and the sounds from inside become distant, as though happening somewhere else entirely. There were more of them than there were of him. What followed was quick, chaotic, and uneven, a blow to the jaw, another to the side of his head. The kind of impact that disorientates, more than it injures at first. The world tilting slightly, sound distorting, balance slipping just enough to make everything feel wrong. By the time it was over, he was on the ground and they were gone. He made it back to the hotel alone. That part matters. No ambulance and no police. No one accompanying him. Just the long walk back along the beach, where the noise of the night continued as though nothing had happened at all. At some point during that walk, he realised he couldn't hear properly. Not completely, not fully gone, but wrong. As though one side of the world had been dimmed. There was pain too, sharp at first, then settling into something deeper, more constant. And underneath it, something else. A ringing that didn't quite belong to the outside world. He went to bed. Or at least he lay down. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time he shifted, the pain sharpened. The ringing persisted, threading its way through everything else, making it difficult to separate thought from sensation. By morning, the damage was visible. Bruising across the jaw, dried blood near the ear. His friends were concerned enough to insist he see a doctor before flying. At the time, it seemed like a practical decision. But in hindsight, it becomes one of those moments that feels heavier than it should, because it leads to something else, something that doesn't quite fit as neatly into explanation. The doctor at the local medical centre confirmed what the injury had already suggested, a ruptured eardrum. Not life-threatening nor catastrophic, but enough to matter, enough to require time. 48 hours, he told him, no flying. It was, again, a simple instruction, the kind given every day. But Lars didn't accept it easily. He had plans, a return flight, a life waiting for him at home that, until that moment, had felt stable and certain. Now there was a delay. And something about it didn't sit right. Not just inconvenient, wrong. His friends left without him. That's the last time they saw him behaving in any way that could be considered normal. After that, things began to change. He tried to extend his stay at the hotel. He was told no, fully booked, no availability. A small problem, a logistical issue. But it left him standing outside alone, in the heat, with nowhere to go and no clear plan. And it is somewhere in that space, between the injury, the lack of sleep, the isolation, and whatever else might have been building beneath the surface, that something begins to shift. Not visibly, and not yet. Enough that, later, when people look back at this moment, they begin to ask a different kind of question. Not what happened next, but when did it actually start? By the evening of July the 7th, the heat had not lifted. Even as the sun began to drop, the air still carried that heavy, unmoving warmth that seems to press in from all sides. Back in Germany, however, the light was already beginning to fade, and in a quiet home far removed from the noise of the Bulgarian coast, Sandra Mittank was preparing for bed when her phone rang. It was her son. At first there was nothing unusual in that. He had been due home that day, and although she expected he would already be back in Germany, there was nothing strange about a call to say he had landed safely or was on his way. When she answered, her voice was light, almost automatic in its warmth, asking him how the journey had been. But what came back was not what she expected. There was silence. Not the clean silence of a dropped connection, but something softer, as though the line was still open, but whatever should have filled it was hesitating. She called his name once, then again, and this time she heard something in response. Uneven, shallow breathing. The kind that suggests not rest but effort. When he finally spoke, it took her a moment to recognise his voice. It was quieter than usual, lowered almost to a whisper, and there was a tremor in it that made each word feel as though it had been forced out rather than spoken naturally. He told her he was still in Bulgaria, and before she could fully process what that meant, he said something else. He was scared. At first the words didn't settle into anything concrete. They hung there, disconnected from context. Sandra tried to make sense of it in the simplest way possible, assuming confusion, perhaps a misunderstanding about his flight. But as he continued speaking, that explanation began to slip away. He told her there were people following him. 4 men, he said, though he didn't describe them clearly, only that they were there, that they had been there since the night before, and that they intended to harm him. His voice tightened as he spoke, the words coming faster now, not quite out of control, but moving in that direction. For a moment, she wondered if this was some kind of misunderstanding, something that could be resolved with a simple explanation once he had calmed down. But there was something in the way he spoke that resisted that interpretation. Something too immediate, too certain, to be dismissed as exaggeration or confusion. She asked where he was. He told her he had left the resort and moved closer to the airport, choosing a different hotel in the hope that it would put distance between him and whoever he believed was following him. He spoke about it as though it had been a deliberate, strategic decision, one that made sense at the time, but now he was no longer convinced it had worked. He thought they had found him again. At this point, Sandra did what most people would instinctively do in that situation, and told him to contact the police. But the suggestion did not reassure him. He dismissed it almost immediately. He said he couldn't trust them. The certainty in his voice when he said it was more unsettling than the statement itself, because it suggested that this wasn't a fleeting suspicion, but something that had already taken hold, something that had been considered and accepted as fact. Instead, he asked her to do something else. He wanted her to cancel his bank cards. He believed that whoever was following him might have access to them, though he didn't explain how or why, only that it was a risk he couldn't ignore. Then, almost abruptly, he shifted to something else entirely. He asked her about the medication he'd been given, the antibiotic. He told her he had taken it as instructed, but that it didn't feel right, that something about it seemed wrong in a way he couldn't fully explain. He wondered aloud if it had been tampered with, or if the doctor who prescribed it had been involved in whatever he believed was happening to him. By this point, Sandra was no longer trying to interpret what he was saying in practical terms. The conversation had moved way beyond that. There was a growing sense, difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore, that whatever was happening to her son was not something she could reach through explanation or reassurance. She tried to keep him talking, tried to slow him down. But before she could draw anything more from him, the call ended. She tried to call him back immediately, once, twice, again. Each time it went straight to voicemail. The distance between them, which had until that moment been little more than geography, now felt like something else entirely, something heavier and more absolute, as though whatever he was experiencing had placed him somewhere she could not follow. Back in Varna, the room he had been speaking from was dark. The curtains had been pulled shut, sealing off any view from outside. He had positioned himself away from the windows, not near the bed, not near the centre of the room, but in a corner, where he could see the door clearly without being immediately visible from it. At some point after the call, something shifted again. He left the room. The hotel was not particularly remarkable, the kind of place designed for short stays and little else. With long corridors that carried sound unevenly and lighting that felt slightly too harsh in some places and too dim in others. As he moved through it, his attention seemed to catch on everything at once, every door, every shadow, every movement at the edge of his vision. He checked the windows more than once, looking out not casually but with intent, scanning the spaces beyond the glass as though expecting to find someone already watching him. Each time he moved away, it was only briefly before he returned again, compelled to check once more, as though the act of looking was the only thing preventing something from happening. He went down to the foyer and remained there for a time. He paced back and forth without clear direction, his focus shifting constantly between the entrance, the people passing through, and the spaces just beyond them. Anyone entering the building drew his attention immediately, held it for longer than would be considered normal, before being released only when they had moved out of sight. And then he stepped into the lift, the doors closed, and for a brief moment, the space seemed to offer something the rest of the building did not: containment and predictability, a place where nothing could approach without being seen. But even that didn't last. When the doors opened again and another man stood waiting to enter, the effect was immediate and disproportionate, as though the presence of another person in that confined space introduced a risk that could not be tolerated. He left quickly and faster than necessary, and moments later he was outside. When the phone rang again, it did not bring the relief Sandra had been hoping for, but instead confirmed almost immediately that whatever had taken hold of her son was deepening. This time his voice was no longer quiet or controlled, and whatever restraint had been holding his words together during the earlier call had given way to something far more urgent and far more chaotic. He told her he had not slept at all, and there was a kind of hollow disbelief in his voice when she asked the question, as though the idea of rest had become irrelevant. He said they were getting closer. There was no hesitation in the way he said it, no suggestion that this was a possibility or a fear that might not be real. For Sandra, listening from hundreds of miles away, there was a moment, quiet but unmistakable, when the nature of the situation seemed to change. It was not that she suddenly understood what was happening. It was that she understood she could not reach him through it. She tried to ground him in something simple, something immediate, urging him to go to the airport, to place himself somewhere public, somewhere structured. At first he resisted. There was a pause, a hesitation that suggested he was weighing the idea. And then gradually he agreed. The relief she felt at that moment was immediate, because it rested on the hope that he would follow through on what he had said, and that once he reached the airport, something would interrupt whatever was happening to him, whether through intervention or simply through the presence of normality. They ended the call with that understanding. He would go to the airport. He would get on the first available flight, and he would come home. And once he reached the airport, he remembered the earlier advice, the instruction not to fly. And although he no longer trusted the doctor who delivered it, the idea itself had lodged somewhere in his mind. He needed confirmation, not reassurance, but something that would either validate or disprove what he had already begun to suspect. And so he made his way to the airport clinic. Dr. Kostov had not expected anything unusual when Lars entered the room, but he soon realised this was no longer a straightforward medical consultation. There was something else at play, something that could not be addressed through examination or explanation alone. And it raised a different kind of concern altogether, one that required a different response. He could not simply clear Lars to board a flight and allow him to leave in that condition, not without further assessment. But before he could act on that, before he could direct the situation in any meaningful way, there was an interruption, the knock at the door, and with it, the final shift. What followed happened quickly, as though everything that had led up to that moment had been moving toward it in ways that were only visible in hindsight. The sound of the knock did not register as neutral. It did not belong to the environment in the way it should have. Instead, it seemed to land with a weight that transformed into something else, something that confirmed, rather than questioned, the fear that had been building. Lars froze, his entire body locking in place, as though the space around him had suddenly become dangerous, his eyes fixed on the door. And in that moment, whatever distinction remained between what was happening inside his mind and what existed outside of it appeared to collapse. When he moved again, it was not measured. It was explosive. He stood so quickly that the chair behind him was knocked aside, his expression no longer uncertain or searching, but absolute in its terror. He said he did not want to die there. He said he had to get out. And when the door opened, revealing nothing more than a man in a high-visibility vest, something entirely unconnected to anything he feared, it made no difference at all. Someone entirely unconnected to anything he feared, it made no difference at all, because by then, what he was running from was no longer something that could be disproven by what was in front of him. And he ran out into the terminal, into the noise and movement of brightness, into a space that should have offered safety, but which, in that moment, only seemed to intensify the chaos of everything he was experiencing. People turned as he passed, some stepping aside instinctively, others watching with confusion as he moved through them with a kind of singular focus that did not belong in that environment. He did not stop to collect anything, not his bag, not his passport, not his phone. He just left. CCTV cameras tracked him as he moved, from one corridor to another through the terminal, toward an exit that was not intended for passengers. He reached the perimeter fence within seconds, an 8-foot barrier topped with barbed wire, the kind designed to prevent exactly this kind of movement, to clearly define where the controlled space of the airport ended and the outside world began. Under normal circumstances, it would have been enough to stop anyone, or at the very least slow them down long enough for intervention. But he climbed, without apparent concern for the wire, for the height, for the risk of injury, moving with a speed and determination that suggested the barrier itself barely registered as an obstacle. For a brief moment, his body was caught on the top edge, suspended between one side and the other, and then he dropped down into the field beyond, and he kept running. The footage shows him moving steadily, not erratically, but with direction, as though he knew exactly where he needed to go, even if the reason for that direction was not something anyone else could see. And then, gradually, he moved out of frame, beyond the reach of the cameras, beyond the last point at which his presence could be confirmed with certainty. And that was the last verified sighting of Lars Mittank. From that moment on, everything becomes uncertain. Search teams were organised. The area surrounding the airport was combed, first in widening circles, then with greater intensity as time passed and no trace of him was found. The fields were searched, the wooded areas examined, pathways, roads, nearby buildings, all checked repeatedly under the assumption that something, anything, would eventually surface. But nothing did. For his mother, the absence of answers became something she had to live with, almost immediately. The last time she had spoken to him, he had been afraid in a way she could not reach, describing a situation she could not verify, asking questions that had no clear grounding in the reality she understood. And now that fear had carried him somewhere, leaving behind only fragments of what might have happened, and a sequence of events that refused to settle into anything definitive. She contacted authorities, she worked with investigators. She sought out anyone who might have seen something, heard something, remembered something that could help reconstruct the path he had taken after leaving the airport grounds. At one point she hired a private investigator, hoping that a different perspective might uncover what official searches had missed. But the result was always the same. Nothing conclusive. Years have passed since that day. There have been reported sightings, scattered across different countries, none of them verified, each one raising hope briefly before dissolving under scrutiny. His mother continues to search, to advocate, to keep his name present in a way that resists the quiet erosion that time can bring to cases like this. But the central fact remains unchanged. The last confirmed image of Lars is of a man running, not away from something that can be identified, but away from something that to him was undeniable.
ID Tech is more than just the original and most trusted tech camp for kids ages 7 to 17. ID Tech is where kids find their people. The engineering and creating people. The fire-breathing, shell-spinning BattleBots people. The just as happy building games as they are playing them people. ID Tech offers over 50 epic courses, like Camp Crunch Labs IRL, BattleBots with Take-Home Bots, and more at 75 college campuses across the country. Visit idtech.com and use code IDTech to save $150 on a week that's guaranteed to be the highlight of your kid's summer.
United Health Group is bringing in-home treatment directly to patients, closing care gaps, identifying risks earlier, and improving patient outcomes. In 2025, patients received over 19 million home visits. Learn more at unitedhealthgroup.com/commitment.
Now, obviously, there could be many reasons for why Lars ran off. I've seen people mention a head injury because he got into the fight and all those various other things, which, yeah, possibility. Having a son with a head injury, anything's possible because it can mess with you, obviously. Now, the one thing I really don't understand is why he was never found. Because these days, this is a bit older, this case, but it's not that old. People just can't disappear. Or can they? Bigger countries, I'm sure. But like in the UK, you can't disappear as much as I try, as much as I want to. There's no way, because somebody would find me. And it's just bizarre to me that they would have this huge efforts to try and locate this man. And he was never seen again. And that is scary. Well, that's it from me today. I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you again tomorrow for the Haunted episode. Take care, everyone.
Ever walk past a place for rent and wish you could just take a peek inside? Maybe even explore the layout, envision the natural light streaming through the windows, or plan where your vinyl record collection would go. At Apartments.com, you can. With tools like their 3D virtual tours, you can see the exact unit you could be living in. Really envision yourself in your new home with Apartments.com, the place to find a place.
Here's a tip for you. There's a podcast out there with fans waiting to be your next customer. They tune in every week, they trust the host, and that host wants to talk about brands like yours in their own words to their audience. The problem is, you just haven't been introduced yet. We're Acast, where that introduction happens. As the world's largest podcast marketplace, we let you browse shows, see who's listening, and book host-read sponsorships or run your own ads, all from one platform. Transparent pricing, real-time data, complete control. Start advertising on podcasts by visiting acast.com/advertise.
The stories told on the Whispering Woods are inspired by historical records, witness reports, and local folklore. While every effort is made to research and represent events accurately, some details, names, and locations may differ from official accounts or have been changed out of respect for those involved. These episodes are created for storytelling and entertainment purposes and should not be considered definitive fact or investigative journalism.